Our next presenter is Jeremy Holmes. He is the coordinator of sustainable programs at Roanoke Valley Allegheny Regional Commission. His topic is bicycles, buses, carpools, transportation that builds neighborhoods. Let's make him feel welcome.
One of my jobs is I run a program called Ride Solutions. And what Ride Solutions does is we are a transportation demand management agency, which is a fancy way of saying we try to move more people with fewer cars by encouraging carpools, bicycles, telework. We do that to improve air quality, reduce carbon emissions, save taxpayer dollars. I got into this business actually at a very early age. I rode a pony to elementary school where I was growing up in San Diego, California. So this is my sister and I on a daily school commute. And I credit the fact that I'm into sustainable transportation because I left California before I learned how to drive. California is the land of the automobile. This is an exchange in LA. LA was one of the first major cities in the country built after the automobile age. And so the whole city and much of California is on the scale of an automobile. It lacks walkable neighborhoods and a lot of public transit. In fact, there are theories that suggest that LA's gang culture, as portrayed in the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas game, comes from the fact that LA didn't have public transit. And so a lot of the neighborhoods became isolated, people who couldn't afford cars couldn't get to jobs, and the city largely became balkanized. What does that have to do with Ride Solutions in Southwest Virginia? Well, when you talk about transportation, you're largely talking about space and how your community chooses to use space. So the space defines much of our community, how we interact with our neighbors, the kinds of businesses and buildings that exist in our community, the amount of green space we have, just sort of the way we build our community and its aesthetics. To get a sense of how we have chosen to use space in the U.S., we have paved enough roads and parking lots to cover the state of Georgia in asphalt, just in the U.S. alone. And we have enough roads to circle the equator 157 times. And that's just in the U.S., this isn't worldwide. It's important to remember, when we talk about transportation, we sort of default to thinking about a car. Transportation isn't a car, it's an activity, it's something we do to get to A to B. So transportation isn't a car, and it's not a bicycle. We have choices, and a lot of times we have to remember when we talk about funding, decisions we make in our community, that it's a choice we make as individuals. And those choices have impact. So if one person decides to ride a penny farthing to work, might encourage their town to build penny farthing lanes, which in turn can encourage more people with that safe infrastructure to ride penny farthings to work. So changes that we make, small changes that we make, end up influencing the way our communities develop. What are some of the impacts of our current transportation policies? Well, building a road in a rural area is $3 to $4 million, and in an urban area is $45 million per mile. Resurfacing a road is about $500,000. A bike lane is $1 million. So just in terms of where we spend transportation money, having choices can save money. In Washington State, the amount of oils and toxins that run off roads and parking lots into Puget Sound is the equivalent to an Exxon Valdez oil spill every 2 years. Virginia right now is struggling with stormwater management issues that are largely a function of how we move and park cars. This is Shenandoah National Park, just up the road, on a good air quality day versus a bad air quality day. In Roanoke, about half of our air pollutants come from vehicle emissions, and most of those come from, a lot of that comes from travel on 91. Air quality is not only ugly, it affects lung and heart health, and has been shown to affect brain development in children. Suburban sprawl. Suburban sprawl, because of cheap gas and long commutes, we've invested a lot in this kind of land development. This is very expensive to maintain these roads, these cul-de-sacs. It's expensive to deliver emergency services, to run power and sewer. It also eats up green space that previously would have helped keep the air clean. Some less scary choices. So when we think about what we can do with transportation, one thing we can do is to invest in complete streets. And this is a way of thinking about streets that serve bicyclists, walkers, drivers, people waiting for the bus. It makes it easier to interact with buildings on the street and just makes it a nicer place to be when you're on the streets in your urban areas or in your neighborhoods. It encourages building better buildings. It encourages historical rehabilitation. If people like being out of their cars and on their streets, they're going to like to be around attractive buildings. They're going to like to live in attractive buildings and do business in attractive buildings. This goes a long way to encourage urban renewal. improvements in your neighborhood. It can create opportunities for creativity, such as turning a bus stop, which are not always very attractive places to be, into a work of public art. This is a bus stop at William Fleming High School in Roanoke. When people start to interact with their streets and value their streets more, and look at places where people gather on the streets as an opportunity to do more interesting things in those streets. Transportation is also a decision about how we use time. So if you think about doing more exercise when you're on the bike commute, if you think about reading a great novel when you're on the bus, you can think about spending more time with your family when you're teleworking or socializing with friends while you're carpooling. We spend about 2 weeks a year in America just waiting in traffic. So if you think about how much time we invest. If we aren't using space for cars and roads and parking lots, we have more space to play. The greenways in Roanoke and Blacksburg are a great example of taking space and using it to create green space in an urban area. So whether it's creating greenways, whether it's community garden plots, whether it's parks for kids, it's a valuable use of space. When you think of your streets differently, you begin to use them differently. You can dress up in costumes and ride down the mountain on very tiny bicycles like the Roanoke Star Bombers do. Or you can do what we did this year in Roanoke, where we shut down downtown Roanoke and did a fashion show and threw frisbees and did hula hoops and just got people to think of the streets differently. Perhaps more importantly, when you use that space, you're more likely to interact with your neighbors. If you're not in a car going past them, you're going to talk to them, you're going to learn something about your neighborhood, you're going to care about your neighborhood a little bit more. I would challenge you, if you haven't ridden a bike or walked through your neighborhood, do so, and you will probably see something that you've never seen before about your neighborhood. And this isn't a big thing. You can make one small change in your life. You can make a bike commute once a week. You can telework once a month. But once you start doing those across a big population, across a city, town, or region, it can end up having a really huge effect on how our neighborhoods